I am what you would call a very small cog in this big wide thing we call the internet. Now, my opinion is just one. Admittedly, it's a small voice that I do hope to grow. However, if Keir Starmer has his way, I won't be growing any voices. I won't be talking and saying what I think. I'll be in prison, rather than simply speaking my mind. The unprecedented level at which this once great nation has deteriorated is astounding. A project of deterioration that began very much so in the Cold War. It bided its time to become New Labour, of which point it started a program of social destruction under Blair. After they left office, they didn't really leave office because David Cameron then took up the mantle and caretakered these policies. Now, they are being fully realised under Keir Starmer. Now look, I hope all intelligent, determined and willing-minded Englishmen will be fighting this. We will fight this to our core. However, we are fast approaching the point where I, a nobody on the internet, let's make that clear, I'm nothing on the internet, but I may have to seek asylum from political persecution in another country because of this Labour government. I have really thought of many different ways of how to present this video. I could have gone down the route of simply showing all the people who have been arrested, people who participated in the riots, people who tweeted about it, people who retweeted about it, or people who just happened to walk past the events themselves who have ended up in prison, and then just go on some hideous rant about how awful this is. But you don't need me to do that. You already know this. You can see what's going on. The internet has allowed the truth to be out there. No, I've decided to do something a little more calm and centered. Something different. I'm going to present to you aspects of an interview that took place before the election. It's with Peter Hitchens. Now, Hitchens is the brother of well-known academic Christopher Hitchens, a man whose own history, like his brother Peter, started off as very hard left-wing, but as he got older and wiser, became not right-wing, but alerted to the changing issues in the world, including his warnings about the so-called religion of peace for many years.
This is very urgent business, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you. Resist it while you still can, and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them. And it's your own preachers who will do it for you, and your own multicultural authorities who will do it for you. Resist it while you can.
Peter Hitchens, unlike his brother, is socially conservative, but like me, he despises the Conservative Party. Now, in this recent interview he's done with Trigonometry, which all links are in the description of the video, Peter has made assertions about Keir Starmer that, if true, of which this video endeavours to try to prove one way or the other, are a clear indicator as to why we are all in this situation, why we are all fast approaching the nightmare that George Orwell fictionalised all those years ago. But as I stated before, New Labour is a source of all these woes. So let's start with that.
And from my own deductions, that a Blair government would be deeply and irreversibly damaging to the country in many ways. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. And again, we had the same miasma of moronic self-indulgence. Oh, well, the Tories deserve a period in opposition. The Tories deserve to be punished. John Major's awful. That Tony Blair, he looks all right. We don't know what he's going to do, but he says he's in favour of education and things like that. He says he's in favour of being tough on crime. So let's give him a go. And they gave him a go. And he smashed up the United Kingdom. He wrecked the Constitution. He wrecked the economy. He destroyed huge numbers of personal pensions. And he unleashed a wave of social, moral and cultural revolution which still sweeps through the country with very damaging effects.
The attitudes of simply wanting the Tories out in 1997 can be felt here during the 2024 election. I myself can be guilty of thinking that. So indeed, history appears to be doomed to repeat itself. Now, the argument that Hitchens makes is simply one of not voting. Remember, this is before the election. He's arguing, don't vote. Now, to not be part of this system, which in principle I respect, but practicality dictates that someone has to win. So, for me, if you don't try, how can you honestly, hand on heart, say, I did my best to prevent something?
And he smashed up the United Kingdom, he wrecked the Constitution.
Now, one assertion that Hitchens has made, that Blair smashed up the United Kingdom, well, this is a reference to the Devolution Acts. These are acts that prior to its implementation, the UK operated as a single government heading in one direction. Wrongly or rightly, doesn't matter. Tony Blair allowed for independent governance of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which on paper sounds good, you know, democracy and all that. But in practice, it torpedoed the various laws that make up our constitution, and it gave rise to this massive anti-English sentiment, particularly from Scotland.
He the economy, he destroyed huge numbers of personal pensions.
Another assertion he makes is that he R-worded the economy. I can't say the actual word on YouTube because of censorship. Now, there are far too many examples to use, but he is accurate in this sentiment. But for clarity, and a good example, Blairism led to consumer debt on an unprecedented scale, as an old BBC source here says that I'm sure they have overlooked. High level of personal debt fueled, should be 2 L's and fueled, by high house prices and easy access to credit cards, which has led to UK household debt being higher than in other rich countries. Blair's government was also guilty of what we know as stealth taxes, meaning a tax imposed in a way that is largely overlooked by UK citizens, such as the raiding of pensions. You know, the pension schemes that you have when you retire. £5 billion was raided from what they call wealthy pensions. There's no such thing as a wealthy pension, by the way. Just a well-kept pension that you have invested your life into.
And he unleashed a wave of social, moral and cultural revolution which still sweeps through the country with very damaging effects.
The other claim Peter Hitchens has made is that the wave of social and cultural revolution that Blair undertook, well, that refers to the de-Christianization of society and embrace of multiculturalism. He was, as in Blair, was the architect. He was the one that allowed mass immigration to begin in this country at levels that only the United States and Saudi Arabia have the land space to accept. So that's a small snippet of what Blair did, but the Blairist project is not complete. It's merely halted, or dormant under the Tories, who themselves thought they needed to act like Blair to win elections, to win from the centre, as they say. But now we move on to Keir Starmer.
Starmer himself is a man of very interesting background. I think his struggles over, what I find actually the rather dull subject of the transgender issue, are interesting. The reason why he struggles over it is because he is, by inclination and politics for a long time, a person of the very, very far left. He was mixed up with a tendency called Pabloism in his 20s, which is an outward branch of Trotskyism, named after a man whose nom de guerre was Pablo, who's really a Greek revolutionary called Michalis Raptis, who decided that the old form of revolutionary socialism was clapped out, in which he was absolutely right, and the seizure of the post office and the barracks by the working class, that wasn't going to happen. But the revolutionaries should concentrate on two things, the red and the green. The red being the cultural, moral and revolution, sort of Gramscian takeover of society in every corner. And the green bit, of course, the fanatical and zealous pursuit of net zero and similar targets.
So for clarification, Pabloism is a branch of Trotskyism, another communist label, that saw the use of outright, obvious revolution as redundant, but instead wanted to achieve revolution by the back door, through long-term social change, irreversible changes that are imprinted on generations to come. Essentially brainwashing them into thinking there is only one way of doing things, one way of living, where religion has no role, where in the case of Britain, the role of the Supreme Court takes precedence over Parliament. The notion of what green and red politics is, traditionally is the incorporation of social policies with green initiatives. But this is far more specific in Starmer's case.
And the red bit is, of course, sexual politics, amongst other things. And Starmer, I think, recognises and has had difficulty over this because he really believes this stuff.
So Hitchens asserts that because Starmer really believes this stuff, you can expect further sexual indoctrination of your children in schools in regard to gender, sex, pronouns, and anything else to do with identity.
People, when Starmer in that first debate said, he was asked whether if a relative was suffering on the NHS waiting list, would he go private? He said no.
If you had loved ones on a long waiting list for surgery, would you, if you felt that that was the only way forward, use private healthcare? Rishi Sunak?
Yes.
Keir Starmer?
No.
Absolutely no if your loved one was on a waiting list for surgery.
No.
Thank you very much.
I don't use private health.
Okay.
I use the NHS. That's where my wife works, in one of the big hospitals. As I say, it runs through my DNA.
OK, thank you.
Telling me
Thank you.
People thought he was making it up or pretending. I absolutely believe him. He was an extremely dogmatic person. The other very interesting thing was when he was finally asked a political question interview a week or so ago. Nick Ferrari asked him, when he kept on referring to working people and they wouldn't face any more taxes, who did he mean by working people?
What is
we
a working
have the growth.
person?
Well, a working person...
Simon Cowell?
Well, a working person is someone who works their living...
I've got that.
And uses our public services. The person I have
So
in
does
mind...
Simon Cowell.
The person I have in my mind, Nick, when I say working people, is people who earn their living, rely on our services, and don't really have the ability to write a cheque when they get into trouble. So the sort of people I'm meeting pretty well every day now.
And he said, in effect, I won't try and quote exactly, but what the effect of what he said was that the people he does not regard as working people are people with savings. Now, there are many, many people in this country who are not particularly well off, who do have savings and who have managed to accumulate assets. They will all, I think, face very strong egalitarian taxation in one form or another under this government.
Starmer is a fanatic. He believes in one law, his own. And apparently, two stories have come to light that reveals his mindset in a whole new way.
There are other things about Starmer's past which are fascinating. The Daily Mail the other day revealed that he'd been on a trip, a work camp trip to Czechoslovakia, deep in the deep frozen years of communism in 1986. This is in the period when people like Václav Havel were being thrown into jail, when Charter 77 supporters were trying very hard to draw attention to the complete lack of freedom of speech, when anybody who opposed the communist regime in Czechoslovakia was either put into prison or driven from his profession and made to work in menial tasks. It was a miserable Cold War time, and yet he went on this work camp.
So, just in case people aren't aware, Chapter 77, for clarification, was a movement that had, quote, criticised the Czech regime's failure to honour the human and civil rights provisions in the Czechoslovak Constitution, the Helsinki Final Act, and the three UN Human Rights Covenants, which had been ratified by the government and had become part of Czechoslovak law. It was essentially a resistance force against the Soviets in this country, and Starmer, according to this Daily Mail article, the official reason for him being there was, along with other students, as part of a scheme behind the Iron Curtain to restore a memorial to victims of a Nazi atrocity in the middle of the Cold War, during a time where actual atrocities were going on because of the communist regimes where our country was fighting against. Your focus was on old Nazi ones at this time, really? Okay, so why is this important? Well, you see, this camp that he was at was overseen by a spy agency, the Czech spy agency, but also we know that previous to this, an international work camp at Prague was also overseen by this same spy agency as part of their Active Measures Initiative. For those unfamiliar with the concept of active measures, this was highlighted by former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov.
Only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process, which we call either ideological subversion or active measures to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely, borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized."
As you can see, this is a process that takes a long time, a very long time, and there is ample reason to believe now that Keir Starmer, in my personal opinion that is a person that has been exposed to such active measures, and perhaps is now implanting those same techniques on the greater British public, as well as creating the final building blocks needed for a communist superstate. Religion has been removed from public life. Patriotism has been removed from public life. The majority population is being removed. All the blocks are in place. However, further proof comes from the second story.
He was also, when he was a lawyer, a young lawyer in 1980s, secretary of a body called the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. Now, there are lots of things I could say about that, but I won't say any more than this. The Haldane Society was the result of a split among left-wing lawyers in London in the 1940s, a split largely between sympathizers of the Soviet Union and non-sympathizers of the Soviet Union, in which the Haldane Society was the society of choice for those who were more inclined towards sympathy for the Soviet Union, and the Society of Labour Lawyers was the Society of Labour Lawyers, of normal Labour Party members who were also lawyers. No one who was a left-wing lawyer in London in the 1980s could not have known about this distinction. I have particular reasons for knowing about it, but no one, Keir Starmer could not have known, could not have been unaware that there was this distinction, yet he was secretary of the Haldane Society rather than a member of the Society for Labour Lawyers. You have to ask why.
You indeed do have to ask why. Well, let's recap to fact check this a little. The Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers is named after Viscount Haldane, a former Liberal turned Labour politician who was part of Labour's first ever government. Now, the organisation claims to be independent of all parties, but was also, and I quote, sympathetic to the British Communist Party. Starmer was secretary of this organisation, not Labour lawyers, which are simply Labour supporters who happen to be lawyers, but this, a specific organisation that has known links to communist agitators. If we take all this information into account, I personally, and I can only talk for myself, can come to only one opinion. That Keir Starmer is, more likely than not, a communist wanting to alter British society ready for a one-party state. That he is also, more likely than not, intending on aggressively destroying all aspects of a free society, all in the name of, quote, safety and, quote, security. I could be arrested for a tweet in today's Britain. So if I'm going to be a political prisoner, why not go down swinging? Thank you all for watching, and as always, take care and God bless.